Late afternoon in the Northern Forest Reserve, the light had taken on a muted amber tone, filtering through the thinning canopy. Along the quiet bend of a narrow stream, the ranger, Daniel Hurst, slowed his steps. Something ahead broke the natural pattern of stone, grass, and water. Lying just beyond the bank, half hidden in tall reeds, was the broad, still shape of a bear. Its outline was too defined to be a shadow, too solid to be driftwood, and too still to be resting in comfort. Daniel paused, scanning the immediate surroundings, listening for movement or the warning calls of birds. But the forest had fallen into a hush that left only the trickle of the water. He shifted his weight, noting the way the animal's flank didn't rise in steady rhythm. There was movement, slight, uneven, but nothing resembling the calm of sleep. The bear's fur, thick and dark with a lighter ruff along the neck, was dulled by dirt and damp patches. One foreleg lay twisted outward, a position that seemed unnatural, as though it had been placed there by the awkward collapse of weight rather than chosen in rest. The head was turned toward the stream, muzzle close enough for the scent of water to drift in, yet the jaw remained slack. From where he stood, Daniel could see no blood, no obvious injury, but the tension in the animal's body suggested something was wrong beneath the surface. He took a measured step closer, boots pressing softly into the mossed earth. Eyes fixed on the shallow lift and fall of the ribs. He knew from experience that an unmoving predator was never without cause. Illness, injury, or exhaustion could all explain the scene before him, but each carried its own weight of risk. If the bear had been injured by a fight, infection might already have set in. If it had been struck by a vehicle in the logging roads beyond the ridge, internal bleeding could be hidden. And if it had been starving, too weak to rise, time was already working against it. Every minute without movement or food narrowed the path toward survival. A soft breeze shifted the reeds, revealing more of the flank. Daniel noticed faint streaks of mud matted into the fur, streaks that trailed toward the shoulder. He crouched, keeping his profile low, and watched for any sign of awareness. A slow blink passed over the bear's half-lidded eyes, a movement so slight that it might have been missed by anyone not looking for it. Relief washed in briefly, but it was tempered by the realization that the bear had made no effort to rise. He eased a hand toward his radio, pressing the side button and speaking in a low tone. Possible injury, adult male bear, East Bank, near marker 7. Not moving, breathing shallow. The reply was brief, confirming a veterinary unit would be dispatched, but Daniel knew they were at least an hour away. That was an hour for the bear to either hold on or fade. If the animal slipped into unconsciousness, recovery would be far more difficult. Moving slowly, he shifted a few steps to the side to get a better view of the head. The ears twitched once, following the sound of the stream, but no other muscle answered the call to move. In the cooling air, his breath came out in pale clouds, and he could see the bear's matching exhalations, thin, uneven streams that broke before they should. He studied the muscles around the chest, looking for the steady flex of healthy respiration, and found only the staggered rhythm of strain. Daniel knew he had to keep his distance for safety, yet also needed to remain visible and calm, a steady presence that might prevent the bear from expending the little energy it had left. He adjusted his stance, planted himself in clear sight, and let the forest settle again. The scent of wet earth and leaf litter hung heavy, the kind of damp that clung to fur and skin alike. He watched the shallow, inconsistent breaths and measured them against the slow slide of daylight toward the horizon. The bear's life was balanced in the quiet space between each inhale and exhale, and every one counted. Daniel kept his pace steady, the weight of each step measured against the need to close the gap without pushing the bear into panic. The distance between them was now less than 10 meters, and from here, the shallow rise and fall of the animal's chest could be seen more clearly. Each breath came in short, uneven draws, as if the air itself had grown heavy. When the reeds swayed apart, The light caught on a wet patch along the front shoulder, and he saw the cause. An open wound, fresh enough that the edges were still dark with clotted blood. The fur around it was thick and matted, clinging in damp strands that hinted at both mud and dried fluid. His eyes moved to the bear's face. The lids lifted and fell in slow, deliberate blinks, the kind that marked exhaustion rather than calm. In the cooling air, the animal's breath left in faint vapor, barely disturbing the stillness that wrapped around the stream bank. He shifted his angle slightly, careful to keep the bear within full view, and noted how the front leg nearest to him remained fixed, pressed stiffly against the ground. That stiffness, combined with the angle of the limb, told him the animal hadn't moved for hours. Maybe longer. He crouched, lowering his profile, and scanned the surrounding vegetation for signs of struggle. The mud along the bank was churned in two distinct patches, as though there had been a brief flurry of movement before stillness took over. A faint scuff mark trailed back toward the tree line, leading to a narrow path where broken stems and bent grass hinted at the bear's approach. If it had come from there injured, it might have been moving for some time before stopping here. Drawn by the water, it now lacked the strength to reach. Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. A steady, quiet line meant more to keep the rhythm of his presence than to solicit any response. Easy now. The bear's ear turned fractionally toward the sound, but did not lift its head. That response was both a relief and a warning. It heard him, but lacked the energy to react further. The wound on the shoulder glistened again when the fading sunlight slipped through the reeds. And in that glint he read the urgency of the situation. Without treatment, infection was inevitable, and with infection, the odds of survival would fall sharply within days. He took one slow step closer, having the space between them, but stopped when the bear's nostrils flared. The animal's jaw tightened briefly, then relaxed, as if even that small display had drained a measure of strength. Daniel could hear the soft pull of its breathing over the sound of the stream, a pattern that broke often, catching in the throat before continuing. Every uneven breath was a reminder that the body was working against time. If the bear tried to rise now, the strain could worsen its injuries. If it remained here without aid, it would likely not last until morning. From his position, Daniel could see the tremor in the shoulder muscles, a slight vibration beneath the fur that signaled pain even in stillness. The animal's weight pressed fully into the ground on one side, the other side hanging just enough to keep pressure off the injured limb. Small flies had begun to gather near the wound, and Daniel knew each one carried the risk of infection deeper into the tissue. He fought the instinct to move too quickly, to close the distance in a rush, reminding himself that any sudden approach could cost the bear what little calm it had left. His radio crackled softly against his chest, a brief check-in from the dispatch confirming the veterinary team was en route. He answered in clipped words, giving precise details. Location, visible wound, breathing irregular, mobility compromised. When the line went quiet again, he returned his focus to the bear, noting the way the animal's head lowered fractionally toward the ground. Eyes half closing again. The light was fading faster now, shadows pulling long across the water. He knew that if the bear lost consciousness before help arrived, the margin for survival would narrow to minutes rather than hours. Every choice he made from here on would have to keep that margin from closing. Daniel stayed low and steady, letting the moments pass without rushing them, because every shift of his weight carried a choice: to hold still and keep the bear calm, or to act and risk pushing it past its limit. The animal had not moved more than a shallow breath in minutes, its head still angled toward the water that slid gently over smooth stones just a few meters away. Yet no attempt came to drink. In the air was the faint metallic tang of blood, carried lightly on the cooling wind. No tracks or scent trails marked the edges of the bank, no sign of a companion, rival, or cub. This bear had come here alone and, unless something changed, might die in the same solitude. The radio at his chest was already alive with the faint static of open contact. but Daniel pressed the side button again, keeping his voice as even as the forest around him. He gave his coordinates, described the wound on the left shoulder, the irregular breathing, the stiffness in the limb. "Condition worsening. Need veterinary response as soon as possible," he added, knowing every word would be weighed against the distance the team had to travel. The answer was calm, but not encouraging. Minimum of 40 minutes. 40 minutes in which the bear's pulse could drop, in which unseen damage inside the chest or shoulder could deepen beyond repair. He studied the ground between them and the stream. The mud closest to the water was dark and soft, a trap for a weakened limb. If the bear attempted to stand in its current state, it might slip, twist, and make the injury fatal. If it remained where it was, the wound would only stiffen. Blood loss and dehydration working together to tip the balance. The silence of the area was complete now, broken only by the low whisper of water and the occasional rustle of dry leaves against each other. Daniel's eyes moved over the bear's body again, cataloging details for the team. Slight swelling around the joint, fur crusted stiff near the wound, a faint tremor passing through the rib cage with each uneven breath. The eyes opened briefly, dark and glassed with fatigue. Then closed again with the long exhale of an animal too tired to lift its head. That moment made the stakes sharper in his mind. If consciousness slipped further, the bear might not respond even to sedation, and the team's options would narrow to the most extreme measures. He shifted back slightly, taking care not to break the bear's fragile calm. Reaching into the side pouch of his pack, he removed a folded tarp and laid it quietly on the grass beside him, a preparation for any immediate care if the animal's position shifted or the team needed a clean space for first treatment. His movements were unhurried, each one designed to keep the bear from wasting the limited energy it still had. As the minutes passed, the light began to drain from the canopy, soft shadows pooling across the water's surface. The bear's breathing slowed further, not in rest but in the heaviness of strain. Daniel kept his gaze on the slight movements of its flank, counting each one as if marking time itself. The gap between breaths felt longer now, each pause holding the risk of not beginning again. In the open space of that fading day, the truth was simple and unchanging. If help did not arrive soon, the forest would lose one of its own before night fully fell. Daniel lowered himself slowly onto one knee, the damp scent of moss and cold earth rising around him. The bear lay in the same position, the line of its back unmoving except for the faint rhythm of strained breathing. He kept his voice low, just above the sound of the stream, each word chosen to hold a steady cadence rather than meaning. The animal's right ear twitched once, a small but certain sign that the sound had reached it. That movement was enough to confirm the bear was still alert, still aware of its surroundings despite the exhaustion pressing it down. Daniel paused, letting the silence settle again before shifting closer by the smallest measure, keeping his profile low and unthreatening. From this distance, the wound at the shoulder was clearer, edges dark with drying blood, the center slick where dampness clung. The fur surrounding it was clumped and flattened as though the bear had lain on that side for too long. A narrow trail of flies hovered in the cooling air, drawn to the scent of injury. Daniel slipped his pack from his shoulder with deliberate slowness, placing it on the ground beside him without breaking eye contact. Inside, folded clean gauze and a small bottle of antiseptic waited, their usefulness dependent on how close he could get without triggering flight. He took off his jacket and laid it gently on the grass a meter ahead, a signal of intent as much as a barrier between them. The bear's head shifted a fraction, nostrils flaring once before settling again. No sound came from its throat, no deep warning or growl, only the uneven pull of air that marked its fatigue. Daniel reached into the open pack, his fingers brushing the edges of the gauze, but kept them in his lap for the moment, studying the bear's posture. If the animal chose to move suddenly, the proximity could become dangerous both to it and to him. A brief murmur left his mouth, barely a breath, meant only to keep the rhythm of his voice present. The bear's left paw flexed minutely against the earth, claws pressing into the soil before relaxing again. That was as much of a reply as he would get. No aggression, only the restless shift of a body caught between instinct to flee and the inability to rise. The light above them was softening further, thin gold filtering through the last gaps in the canopy, touching the damp sheen along the wound. With care, Daniel reached forward, setting the folded gauze on the jacket's edge. He opened the antiseptic bottle and let the cap rest beside him, not wanting the sound to startle the animal. For now, the task was not to treat, but to prepare, closing the space without breaking trust. Each movement was weighed against the cost of reaction. If the bear attempted to rise now, the strain on the shoulder could worsen the injury. If it refused any closeness, the team's arrival would bring sedation instead of the slower, safer care he hoped for. He shifted his weight slightly, placing one hand on the ground for balance and leaned just enough to observe the wound more closely. The surrounding skin was slightly swollen, heat radiating in a way that confirmed inflammation. Infection was likely already taking hold. The urgency pressed harder now. Every hour would deepen the risk. Still, he kept his actions measured, knowing that forcing the moment could undo what little calm the bear had left. The jacket remained between them, the gauze and antiseptic ready. As Daniel watched the animal's eyes half open again, the dark surface catching the last light of day. That flicker of awareness was all he needed to keep his position, waiting for the right chance to act before the window closed. Daniel's gaze lingered on the bear's muzzle, noting the pale dryness of the nose and the way its tongue occasionally shifted against cracked lips. Dehydration was claiming ground as surely as the injury had, and each labored breath pulled from the animal's reserves. If water didn't reach it soon, the loss of fluid would weaken it further, making even the mildest sedation dangerous when the veterinary team arrived. Moving with the same careful pace he had held since finding the bear, Daniel eased back toward the stream, the damp scent of silt and fallen leaves rising as he stepped. The current was slow here, curling around small stones before disappearing beneath a shelf of roots, and he crouched at its edge to dip a shallow metal pan into the clear surface. Cold seeped into his fingers as he steadied the vessel, letting the ripples settle so the bear could hear the quiet sound of water rather than the scrape of metal. He returned in the same low arc, stopping a few meters away to pull a length of thin branch from the undergrowth. Laying the pan in front of him, he used the stick to slide it forward across the grass, keeping his body low and still. The bear's ear twitched first, then its nostrils flared faintly as the scent reached it. For several long seconds there was no movement beyond that, and Daniel kept his breathing even, resisting the urge to encourage it further. Then, with visible effort, the animal's head shifted a fraction from its resting place, eyes opening to half their height. The movement was slow, almost reluctant, but it held direction, toward the shallow glint of water now within reach. The bear's foreleg tensed as it tried to lift its weight, a short tremor passing through the muscle before it found just enough strength to raise its head clear of the ground. Daniel kept silent, watching the calculation in the small adjustments of its posture, the deliberate placement of its good foreleg for balance, the careful lowering of its head to the pan. The first touch of the tongue was cautious, as if testing both the safety of the moment and the reliability of what was offered. Then came a second, longer draw of water, and another after that. The sips were shallow, each one followed by a pause, but with every swallow Daniel could see a faint easing in the tension along its neck and shoulders. This was a fragile exchange, balanced on the thin trust that neither would move too quickly. If Daniel stepped closer now, the bear could retreat into stillness again, wasting the little energy it had used to drink. If it stopped before taking enough water, the effect would be minimal, and dehydration would continue to edge in. So he remained where he was, letting the moment belong entirely to the animal, the pan inching slightly on the grass as the tongue dipped and withdrew. A thin line of water darkened the fur at its chin, catching the fading light. When the bear lifted its head again, its breathing seemed marginally steadier, though still shallow. The eyes met him for the briefest moment. Not in recognition, but in the neutral acknowledgement of another presence that had not brought harm. Daniel noted the small change in posture, the front paw easing back into a more natural position, and knew that, for now, this was enough. The risk remained clear. The wound still held infection's threat, and the bear's strength was far from restored. But in that slow, cautious acceptance of water, a narrow gap had opened between survival and loss. And it was his task to keep that gap from closing before help arrived. The last of the daylight drained from the forest, leaving the stream's surface dim and without color. The air cooled quickly, carrying the scent of wet leaves and the faint metallic edge of the bear's wound. Daniel checked the time, knowing that according to procedure, he should pull back to a safe distance and wait for the veterinary team to arrive. But the bear had only taken a few mouthfuls of water, and its head now rested heavily against the ground once more. The slow, uneven breaths had not strengthened. If left entirely alone, the night's cold could deepen shock, and the stillness could slide into the kind from which there was no return. He weighed the risk, his own safety against the animal's dwindling margin, and chose to stay. He shifted to a position several meters from the bear, just beyond the reach of any sudden movement, yet close enough for his presence to remain part of the animal's quiet awareness. The light was now so low that shapes merged with the surrounding brush, but the soft line of the bear's flank still rose and fell in the dark. Daniel kept his movements minimal, resting his hands loosely on his knees, letting his breathing mirror a slow, steady rhythm. In the silence between them, the stream's murmur became the only sound. Its constant flow, a reminder of what was still moving in a place where almost everything else had gone still. A faint shiver passed along the bear's shoulder, its fur rippling in a slow wave before settling again. The animal's position had not changed, and the weight it placed on one side suggested the injured leg remained useless. Each tremor hinted at pain, but also at the onset of chill now settling into the open wound. Daniel thought briefly of wrapping the jacket he had laid earlier, but the risk of contact without sedation was too great. He settled for remaining in place, knowing that in the animal's current state, a steady form nearby could mean the difference between drifting deeper into weakness or holding on until help arrived. Time stretched. The light faded entirely, replaced by the thin blue-gray of early night. Somewhere distant, a branch cracked beneath the movement of another animal. But the bear did not react. Its ears twitched faintly now and then, each flicker aligning with the small sounds of the forest that still filtered through. Daniel stayed grounded, resisting the urge to check his watch more than necessary. The reality was fixed. Every minute the bear stayed conscious, every breath it managed to take, was another step toward the team arriving in time. He leaned slightly forward, catching the subtle flare of the bear's nostrils as the wind shifted. The scent of water, the faint smell of his jacket, and perhaps his own scent all reached it. There was no rise of the head, no attempt to move, but the awareness remained, and that awareness meant life was still present. He kept his voice low, a near whisper that was more about consistency than communication. "You're doing fine," he murmured, letting the words dissolve into the night air. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the faint hum of an approaching vehicle began to thread its way into the forest, carried on the still air. Daniel didn't move yet, not wanting to break the fragile calm. The bear's breathing remained steady enough to hold hope, though the risk was unchanged. Infection, blood loss, and the cold could still claim it before morning. But for now, he had kept it here, in this place between danger and rescue, and he would hold that position until the light from the team's lamps finally cut through the darkness. The first pale light seeped into the forest, softening the edges of the trees and drawing faint color back into the stream. Daniel had not moved far from his position through the night, shifting only to ease the strain in his legs. The bear remained where it had fallen, though its breathing had stayed steady enough to hold on to the fragile thread of time. A distant hum began to grow into the morning stillness, the sound weaving through the undergrowth until the dark outlines of the rescue team appeared beyond the tree line. Their movements were slow and deliberate, voices low as they approached, the air between them and the bear weighted with caution. The veterinarian knelt a short distance from the animal, her eyes assessing the wound with a quick, practiced scan. A tranquilizer dart was readied, the dosage calculated for the bear's weight and weakened condition. Daniel stayed to one side, keeping his position visible to the bear, whose ear turned faintly toward him even as the dart found its mark. The effect was gradual, first a deeper blink, then the slow loosening of the jaw, the heavy settling of the head into the grass. When the veterinarian signaled, the team moved in, gloved hands working quickly to part the matted fur and expose the full extent of the injury. Fresh water from the stream was poured gently over the wound, washing away the dirt and dried blood. The raw edges beneath showed the depth of the damage, likely the result of a fight or a sharp collision with something solid. Antiseptic was applied in slow, steady strokes, each one careful to avoid unnecessary pressure. The bear's body no longer flinched at the touch, its muscles softened under the sedative's influence. Daniel watched the swelling around the joint as the veterinarian's fingers traced the bone, searching for fractures. None were found, though deep bruising and tissue damage explained the immobility. A thick dressing was laid across the wound, secured with bandaging strong enough to hold but loose enough not to restrict movement when the animal rose. Throughout the procedure, the forest held its morning calm, bird calls beginning to thread into the light, the water's surface catching glimmers of day. Daniel noted the subtle change in the bear's breathing, now deeper and more regular, the harsh edge of pain dulled by both treatment and sedation. The tension that had held the animal rigid for hours seemed to have drained away, replaced by a slackness that spoke of temporary relief. The veterinarian checked the eyes once more, ensuring the sedation remained within safe bounds, and then signaled for the team to step back, giving the bear space to recover at its own pace. Daniel remained where he was, his gaze fixed on the slow lift and fall of the rib cage. The most immediate risks, shock, rapid blood loss, undetected fractures, had been pushed back, though not erased. Infection was still a threat, and the bear's strength would take days, perhaps weeks, to return. But for the first time since he had found it, the animal lay free of the constant strain that had marked every breath. The bandaged shoulder rose and fell evenly, each cycle carrying a little more of the forest's clean air into its lungs. When the team began to pack their equipment, Daniel stayed a moment longer, letting the quiet settle between them all. The light now touched the higher branches, filtering down in muted gold. In that calm, the bear's body seemed almost at peace. The immediate fight for survival eased, if only for now. The stream's low murmur continued beside them, unbroken, as though it had been waiting all night for this small return to balance. The afternoon was mild when they brought the bear back, the air carrying the scent of wet soil and new leaf growth after a light morning rain. The journey from the rehabilitation enclosure had been quiet, the animal shifting only when the truck slowed along the narrow reserve track. Days of rest, clean dressings, and steady meals had put weight back onto its frame, though the fur at the shoulder still bore the trimmed edge where the wound had been treated. The dressing had been removed that morning, leaving a healed seam of skin beneath the darker coat. Muscle movement was returning in full, each step during the short walk from the transport showing more strength than the day Daniel had first seen it motionless by the water. The team kept their distance as the transport gate was eased open. The bear stepped forward slowly at first, claws finding the familiar softness of the forest floor after days on straw bedding. Its head lowered, nostrils drawing in the scents carried on the breeze, damp moss, alder bark, and, faintly, the flowing water beyond the rise. It moved with the measured care of an animal reacquainting itself with space, the shoulder flexing with each stride but without the sharp flinch that had once followed weight-bearing. Every step forward marked a quiet victory, but Daniel kept his focus on the balance of its movement, watching for any sign that fatigue might still linger beneath the surface. The stream lay ahead, just visible through a stand of young birch, the same place where days earlier the animal had been unable to lift its head to drink. Now it approached with deliberate steps, lowering its muzzle to the water's edge. The sound of its drinking was steady, no longer interrupted by pauses for breath. Droplets clung to the fur along its jaw as it lifted its head, scanning the space with calm, alert eyes. There was no urgency in its posture. Only the quiet patience of an animal back in its place. Daniel stood at the tree line, far enough to remain unobtrusive, close enough for the bear to register his presence if it chose. He had no expectation of recognition, only the knowledge that in some way his stillness was part of this moment's shape. The bear's head turned fractionally in his direction, the light catching the heeled curve of its shoulder. It did not hold the gaze long, returning instead to the path along the water that led toward the denser shadows beyond. Its gait was even now, the weight in each step balanced, the injury carried without visible strain. The forest around them seemed to draw in the movement, the calls of small birds threading through the soft sound of the stream. The bear paused once more before the edge of the deeper brush, lifting its head to catch a shifting current of air. Muscles along its back tightened and released in sequence. A subtle readiness in its frame. Then, without hurry, it moved into the cover of the trees, the thickening green folding around its outline until only the faint rustle of undergrowth marked its passage. Daniel stayed where he was, the space before him now empty except for the slow bend of the stream and the print of fresh tracks in the softened earth. The risk was not gone. The bear would still face the challenges of food, territory, and other predators, but it had left here with the strength to meet them, something that had not been certain on the day they first met. He let the moment pass without movement, the sound of the water filling the space where the animal had stood. The forest had taken the bear back, and in its quiet acceptance there was no need for more than that.